Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jonno White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jonno White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Corey Tavella. Corey is the principal at Thomas More College in South Australia. Welcome, Corey.
Thanks so much, Jonno. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. First of all, can you give everyone, I gave a bit of an intro there to what you do, but give everyone a bit of an overview of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, I'm the principal of our school, Thomas More College in Salisbury Downs in South Australia. We are, I suppose we're called a suburban school because we're 15 minutes from the city, but the context of Adelaide is that 15 or 20 minutes outside of a city is actually almost considered rural. And not, I'm being flippant there, but there's a real bit of a misconception about our school that we're not a large school, but we are. So I'm actually the principal of a school with 1,021 students this year, and I have 119 staff that work with me, and I purposely use that word, work with me. And I love my job. It's an absolute privilege, and I've been in education. This is my 22nd year in education now.
Wow, that's incredible. And
Yeah.
it's also great to hear a little bit about the school and where you're
Yeah.
based. Anyone who has never been to Australia or been to, particularly to South Australia, beautiful part of the world, by the way. So yeah, it's lovely down there. So it would be great for listeners to hear a bit of your story. So as you go, I guess as you look back, particularly even childhood, growing up, are there any moments starting there that you look back at and think, wow, that was a pivotal moment for, shaping who Corey is today as a person, but also some of those moments that you think, I had no idea what was going on. I was only little, but I can see there was a seed planted of who I am as a leader back then.
Yeah, it's probably difficult to make some of those connections off the cuff, but one of the things that I'll say is that I probably never intentionally planned on being a teacher. That's probably the first thing that I would say. Having said that, once I became a teacher, I fell in love with it and really couldn't imagine having done anything else. And then I certainly hadn't planned on becoming a principal of a school. So maybe I'll start with some of those early experiences and aspirations.
Yeah.
I was a really happy kid when I was growing up. Dad migrated from Italy. Mum married someone who migrated from Italy. We were quite a small, connected family, but quite a large, extended family. And so I suppose I was always surrounded by people. And that had its pluses and minuses. I'm an introvert, which is challenging for a little bit. So I think I'm the first Tavella. There's not many of us in South Australia, but I think I'm the first Tavella to actually go to and graduate from university. And certainly in my father's extended family that is in Italy as well. I'm the first one, which was pretty big for our family, I suppose. And I sort of didn't think anything of it. We just, it's what you did when you went to school. And I know that my dad, who was a migrant when he came over at 17, he worked really hard for us. And that Dad passed away about 10 years ago. So that probably only really stuck with me once he passed away, just to acknowledge his journey and the sort of, not sacrifices, but the hard work he made for us. So for me, the context is that, family was important, but always being around people, if that makes sense. From there, I went to our local government primary school. And I think what I took from there is that I just learned to love learning. Like, I wasn't particularly good at school, but I loved learning. I loved being around people who were involved in education, really enjoyed my teachers. And then I moved to because my parents had that old adage that you work really hard and you send your son or daughter to the best school. So we moved to what they considered the best school. And it's not saying that it was the best school for everyone, but they sent us for me to a school in the city, Christian Brothers College. I again didn't recognize maybe some of that hard work and sacrifice they made, but I probably didn't enjoy it straight away. It was a very different experience of schooling, but when I look back on it now, I'm very grateful for them making that sacrifice, because if I gained the enjoyment out of and the passion for learning from my previous primary school, moving to Christian Brothers College gave me that real, I suppose, that next level of engagement in learning and maybe a pathway. And just for some context, Christian Brothers College is was a fairly traditional all-boys school, still is an all-boys school, but is a bit more progressive now. And I came across two teachers during my time there that are a bit chalk and cheese, but they sort of gave me some inspiration to look for that next step.
Yeah.
One of them was a very old school a teacher, and the other one was a progressive older female teacher who, in the midst of working in a school full of 900 young men, really challenged that status quo. And I think what I took from both of them was the idea that our job in society, in fact, our role, and from I suppose a Catholic perspective, my school at the time, it's actually our mission to positively challenge what's happening in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
incredible.
So
So they
that's
really influenced you, those two sort of mentors, or that, as who were on completely different ends of the spectrum in terms of progressive versus very conservative teachers.
Yeah, and I suppose the other teachers were fantastic as well. But I think just because they offered that sort of that sense that to be fully human was to challenge, and to continuously challenge and to ask the question, probably lit a fire in me that I didn't fully understand until later. So then progressed into university. I thought I wanted to be a journalist because I loved writing. I loved English. Studied journalism for a year, got really good marks, but sort of looked in the industry and didn't think it was something that I probably wanted to move into, especially in terms of the written form. So I was sort of a bit lost after where to go to from school, because that first year of university, because school was very much, you go do this, you study that, you get into university. And so it's probably one of the first decisions that I had to make for myself, as you get older, and almost went into teaching with a bit of a whim, because I probably thought about those things that I mentioned in terms of loving learning, loving sort of pathways and knowing your future and that sort of stuff, and having an influence. And at that time, loving English. And ironically enough, my first leadership appointment was actually when I was working at a supermarket. I was there for 7 years and was running their front end like a front end supervisor, and happened to work. It was quite bizarre. Happened to work with some young people who were my staff, and I thought maybe this idea of loving learning and connecting with people, and then experiencing leading young people, maybe this is really positive. So all that turned into teaching, and managed to change my direction into become a middle secondary teacher.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible. What did you? I always love asking these sort of questions about those early jobs. What did you learn from your time as in your first sort of leadership role in that supermarket that's really stuck with you? And also, this is always a good one. Were there any absolute clangers where we've all got those stories in early on where you, sometimes not so early on as well, where you really drop the ball, but then it really shapes and you go, wow, I'm never doing that again. Any stories come to mind from the supermarket?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking 25, almost 30 years ago. Yeah, so I don't know if there's many negative stories that I remember. I just remember getting the job because my sister was working there, so it was a pretty easy transition. And then probably finding the impact, because I'm an introvert. For some reason, being there brought out the extrovert side of me. So you felt like you had to almost perform, if that makes sense, to be someone that you're not, to be a successful person working in a supermarket. And maybe I'm looking, taking that into a bit too much detail, but that's a sort of, I suppose, internal reflection that an introvert often does, where you overthink social interactions that might be really easy for other people, but it's actually quite exhausting to do, because some other people who are extroverts can rock up and just perform, whereas an introvert needs to really carefully think about, what's required, the sort of language you might use, and then, what might be an unintended consequence from there. So I think maybe that's one of the first things I learned, that that I was an introvert and it was going to be tough, but I could actually, I could do it. And I think I became, relatively good at it, but that was noticed pretty well in terms of customer service skills. So maybe what I took out of it was just that importance of being able to push yourself beyond what you can be, not to be uncomfortable and not to be someone else, but be the version of yourself you need to be for a certain role. And that was noticed fairly early, and managed to become a front end manager of a place that I thought, wow, I just came here for a part-time job, and ended up managing the place part-time, like the sort of the front end of the supermarket. So it was an interesting part of my journey, interesting stop on the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what about your journey from starting as a teacher to becoming a principal? Was it clear to you from the start that that's what you wanted to do at some point? How did you sort of end up where you are now?
Well, I think because I'd had that very early experience as a leader, and in fact, I remember going to my first teaching job interview and talking about how I'd moved through leadership in the supermarket, and I thought maybe you don't want to hear this, and one of the deputies at the time said, "Actually, no, this is good stuff. You know, let's connect to your leadership journey." So, when I became a teacher, it was all about helping kids to discover a love of learning and to be the best version of themselves they can, which, you know, having just mentioned my schooling journey that I talked to you about before, maybe that played that subconscious role in becoming the teacher that I was. And because I went to my first job, I actually got quite early. I was one of the somehow managed to land a full-time permanent job, which as an early teacher doesn't really happen anymore, where you just walk in and you interview and you think you've stuffed the interview up, but actually it sort of went all right. And I'm not sure whether it was that performance mode that I was able to tip onto as well. That is that, you know, as I mentioned, that almost the extroverted version of me. But I managed to be able to sell that that version of myself that was that real vibrant, positive teacher. And so from there, because it was such a new school, I only really ever taught full time for a year. And there was lots of different leadership opportunities that opened up to me.
Sure.
And while I probably didn't think that I would become a principal, it wasn't an aspiration. I think I learned pretty early that the best version of myself I could be in this school to have the best impact on my students initially, and then working with others, was to be the best teacher I could be, and then to look for opportunities to take the mold of that excellent teacher that I think I was, and start to connect that with other people. So I suppose there were different leadership opportunities. There was, you know, year level leadership and curriculum and different areas in house leadership. We're fast forwarding a bit, managed to move across to 3 or 4 different schools, and I'm happy if you want to delve into any of those journeys. But probably the last significant stop I was at was when I became a deputy principal. I've had 3 deputy principals roles: one at an all boys school, one at an all girls school, and one at a co-ed school. And
Wow.
yeah, so it's a bit of varied experience in there. And when I was looking at leadership, like deputy principal was probably my aspiration, because I saw some excellent deputies, and probably in my time, like I think about my own, failed sports career. I'm a bit of a sports tragic. Like I'm good at lots of stuff in my head, but it actually doesn't really materialize when I'm playing. But I was always the vice captain of teams. So that sense of being a principal or that ultimate leader never really sat comfortably with me. But I came to my current school, Thomas More College, 4 years ago as an acting deputy principal, really as a bit of an arrangement with the previous principal who I'd worked with at another school. And it's just sort of lined up that I was looking for a bit of a break from my previous school, which I loved, but looking for something different. He had need for an acting deputy because the current deputy was going on leave. I'd lined up a study tour in America, and so this sort of sat perfectly for a term. So I was here for a term, acting deputy, said my goodbyes, went to America, was in America for 2 weeks. In the first week that I was there, I got a message from the principal who said that he'd been offered a role acting somewhere else, and that I may have the opportunity to apply for the acting principal role here. And so I applied for it and won it while I was in America. Got off a plane Sunday at about 11 a.m. after being on a 23-hour flight, and then walked in here as the principal the following morning. So it's a bit nuts.
That's that's the perfect. That feels like what you'd do in a reality show of like leadership. You know, the ultimate challenge is put you on a flight for 23 hours and then off the plane, go and lead this new organization for you to lead. Thank you for sharing your journey, and we can definitely unpack different parts of it. One question I have straight away is, you did 3 deputy roles and then you stepped into this role. What have you found the biggest challenge, and what are the biggest differences between being the principal, you know, the captain, versus the deputy, the vice captain? What are the biggest differences and challenges?
I think it's I've got a more fuller appreciation of the importance of building a team and having a team that's yours, that's mine, and that's also ours as a team. So probably one of the things that I maybe fully didn't appreciate when I was a deputy. Like I always appreciated the connection between me as the deputy and the 3 or 4 different principals that I worked with at the 3 different schools. But as I moved further into being an experienced deputy, so just for some context, my first year as a deputy principal was 2010, and my first year as the principal here was early 2019. So I had a decent stint as a deputy across the 3 schools, and I think as I moved into that deputy principalship and over my career, I probably began to more appreciate the importance of team. So it wasn't just about the deputy and the principal. It's actually about relying on the team around you. And I think that's been one of my biggest growth points in coming here, is that knowing that when I moved into this role, even though ultimately the buck stops with me, which is another realization from me, you occasionally look around the room and you realize that, hold on, this decision's actually mine and I need to make it. But then I take a step back and go, I'm okay with that, because I can make this decision with people if that's appropriate. Or I can throw the idea out there, get some feedback, but then the team needs to understand that ultimately the decision is mine, and therefore that responsibility sits with me. So just that important construction of team dynamic, and knowing that this year we are the biggest we've ever been. We're, as I mentioned, 1,021 students. We're a pretty big growing organisation. 4 years ago, we had 768 students. So you can imagine that growth over time. And so one of my catch cries last year was that there's no blueprint to how to build or how to lead a growing school. So what I've tried to do is just to be really acute of the people that we need to lead, the different personality and leadership styles that I think I need and I think that our school needs. And just try and work with them to be leaders of leaders. So my executive team of 7, one of our mantras this year is that we've been doing lots of stuff for a while and doing it really well. The next level for us is to be the leaders who are leading those who are also doing things, but also leading with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. And I love that perspective. It reminds me of Patrick Lencioni's work, which I love. And he talks about cascading communication. And I love that picture of cascading. I think it works really well because as a leader, sometimes I feel like, you can really scratch your head and you can look at the grassroots, you can look at the fruit of what you're doing and go, how am I going to change that? And it can be very daunting. And particularly in schools, when you're talking about, you're looking at young people going, how do we do this better? How do we really play such an important role in society and take this to another level? It's quite daunting. But when you bring it back to, well, why not, how can we get clearer and healthier in our executive team? That's doable. That's something you can do. It's not easy, but it's doable. And then if you cascade that, which I love what you're saying, it's like, okay, if we can if we can really lead ourselves well and we can really rely on each other well and be a healthy team, now it's time to take it to the next level. And that's that picture of cascading that starts in the executive team. It goes to the people that each of us is, that we're leading, and become leaders of leaders and actually raise up leaders. That's great, Corey. I love that.
Yeah, we talk about, I love the idea of cascading leadership. We talk about, divergent and shared leadership as well, which is, it's the same thing. The idea that we can't lead a school of 1,020 the same way we led a school of 768. But you also can't compromise on quality, because we are, unashamedly the school for choice in this area, which is just awesome. We built that really well over the last few years, and my predecessors as well. So for us, it's not about just doing things more efficiently, but it's doing things. It is about efficiency, but it's not compromising on performance. It's actually improving that performance over time and getting better. And I probably my natural leadership style, or my style sort of had evolved into working closely with people, which is a real challenge because I can't work closely with 1,021 students and 119 staff. So another value that I've held, that I do hold strong as a leader, is the idea of presence. So what I've tried to do is try and think about, well, how can I be called to be present with people while at the same time, being involved in that cascading leadership. And that's a real challenge, but it's a positive challenge that I've got to keep reminding myself every day of, how do you keep leading the strategy, but also how do you keep working with everyone so people know that you're present.
Yeah, and it is a tension, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
I definitely think you can focus completely on your executive team and then
Yep.
realize absolutely without any intention that you come across as very absent to other people because you're not spending any time being present. And then you go, what do you mean
Yeah.
and that's where I think what I love about what you're saying is that being present is very strategic. You
Yeah.
can't, and there might be small business leaders listening who are just breaking through a ceiling of 20 staff and
Yeah.
they're getting super stretched and going, I can't spend time with every one of them. But
Yeah.
you've got that times 6, it's like there's
Yeah.
just physically no way you can do that with 120, but you can be very strategic about what being present looks like as a leader of 120. And it's the same, it's different, but it's the same principle for a leader of 100,000.
Yeah.
Being present is just a different level of challenge, but it's the same principle.
Yeah, and I'd probably agree with you, but also challenge on the language around strategic. And I would say it's more about intentional. Like for me, strategic presence implies that you're planning to be present with people. And I think when you do that, yes, of course you are, but it's almost a bit mechanical. And I've seen and worked with people who may have done that before, where it's almost like a ticker box. I need to spend 5 minutes with these people today, and that's okay. But again, I think that's one way of strategic presence. To me, yes, it's strategy. Yes, you're planning, but it's actually intentional. So if I'm going to, take 20 minutes to be with a certain group of people, let's make sure they understand that I value that time, because I do. And I hope that I've actually got, they can see the intention in where I'm gathering. The intention might just be to say hello and see what's going on. Or the intention might be, let's have a conversation about where this is going and how we can improve it. So for me, that idea of, that idea of, and we've talked about it this year with one of our themes of impact. Like for me, it's about intentional impact. So knowing that you can have an impact on doing it this way, and also being mindful of what that impact might be.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you what you found as a deputy and as a principal, because when we have these conversations, I always imagine, the listener who suddenly has been listening, but all of a sudden goes, this is what I need. I need to work out how to be present. Corey seems to know how to do that. What have you found? Like, what does intentional presence look like for you? And what doesn't it look like? I don't know. Yeah, maybe give us a bit of what you've found so far.
I done it. I've got two things that come to mind. I remember having my first, I'm quite aspirational, even though I'm an introvert. I like to be doing good things and like to be achieving. And that comes from a bit of my leadership style and personality profile, which I might get into later. But the idea of achieving something is really important to me. So sometimes that can lead me to be quite narrow-minded and have, a goal, and nothing stops me from achieving that. And I remember in my first year as deputy, I was quite young as a deputy in our system over here. And I think even now, I think I'm probably the youngest or second youngest principal in our system. Certainly in the secondary sense. But after my first year of deputy principalship, in one of my appraisals, there was some really strong feedback about being intentional and being meaningful. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And one of the guys said, well, we noticed what the comment that's been said is that when people come into your office, you'll often talk to them, but you're actually doing something else at the same time. So, you might be talking to them, but your attention's away, or you might be talking to them, but you're looking at the clock. And I was never aware that I actually did that. For me, it was about an efficiency of, okay, I've heard what you've got to say. Now I want to act on it. And I think subconsciously I was actually acting on what they were saying without being present with them. So that's one of the things that, that idea of when someone's with you as a leader, they're really intentional about why they're there. So the listening is really important to understand why they're there, because if I understand what they're hoping to get from me and why they're coming to see me, I can then be really intentional in my response to them. And that response might need to be pastoral. It might need to be a bit more listening. It might need to be investigative. And look, I'm not really sure. Tell me a bit more about that. Or it might need to be authoritarian or industrial and saying that, look, you've heard this. This is just not right. This is the way things are. It's not my default leadership style, but I think I do lots of really keen listening when someone comes in, because I really need to work out what their intention is in coming to see me.
Yeah.
The second thing I was going to mention, I did a few different coaching courses early, and one of the things they spoke about again was just that idea of active listening. That when you're having conversations with someone, and I could picture myself doing this 11 years ago, and someone's talking to you, and you know that you're talking, but they're just waiting for you to stop talking so they can get in their perspective. And I think there's a constant awareness from me to not be that person, and to be the person who is authentic and is present. So I suppose back to your original question, I don't have any great wisdom to share around how you be a present leader, apart from just giving people the time that they need. And if that means that if they come in 5 minutes and want to jump into something, it actually might mean saying, look, I can't be present to you at the moment. I know this is really important to you. We're going to find a way to do it, but I just can't do it now.
Yeah.
It's better than offering a solution that might be a really quick one that's quite inauthentic.
Yeah, that's so good. That's actually great advice. I think that's really good. The wisdom around being present. But that's brilliant. What you said at the end there is that just, I guess, setting expectations around that. But when someone, it's those little things often that when someone comes in, giving them your full presence. And the other thing that strikes me out of your story is the only way you found that out was because of a process where there was obviously some element of 360-degree feedback. And the problem with all of us, myself included, is we don't know what we don't know, and we cannot see what we can't see, right? And I'm sure when I'm leading people, I'm sure there are things that I do that are so frustrating. And really that should be the same for all of us, to be aware of that. And so that's what I love about your story. The only way you were able to find that out, which is now, years later, you're bringing it up as one of the keys to being present, is actually how is that you got that feedback, which, is easy. And this is, I was saying this with someone else on the podcast. The problem with feedback is the higher you get and the more authority you have, responsibility, the easier it is to control the feedback you're getting.
Correct.
You're right. It's
a
vicious cycle, because then your blind spots only get bigger, and yet you are in control of the feedbacks. You cannot see them. And so I think a big challenge for any leaders listening is, which ties into all things, not just presence, is to seek authentic feedback. And even if it's heartbreaking and a bit, like shattering, it's worth it in the long run. They were a couple of things I got out of that. So that was great. Really good advice, Corey.
I think I've got probably a couple of things to add there, if that's okay, Jonno.
Please,
I reckon, like for me, as I've formed myself as a leader, there's probably 3 levels. Like, you're absolutely right in terms of having the courage to get some honest feedback. And as you become, a more advanced leader, it is sometimes tougher to get that feedback, maybe until it's, it's rolled up into something that's really that you don't want to hear, because the feedback has been mixed with emotion. But for me, there's 3 things that I've found as key to keep myself honest with this, and to not go back into what used to be my default, which was that straight and narrow stuff. So the first thing, as I mentioned before, is about building your team. And I think I inherited an excellent team, and I've been able to build on that with some departures as well. And I'm really directed in looking for those people who in some ways will complement my style, but in other ways where needed will absolutely challenge. So I've got a couple of these in particular who I will often throw some things out because I know they're going to challenge me, but I want that. And I'll often be intentional as well and say, look, we're in a bit of a rush with this, but I need people to tell me where the warts are on this. Let me know. Am I really stupid in saying this? Where are we going? So that sense of team feedback is important. The second one is still having mentors, and as you know, as high as you move up, you know, I was saying to my son the other day, I've got three boys, one in year 10, one in year 8, one in year 2, and the
Yeah.
two older boys are like me, they're sci-fi nerds, and we always refer to Star Wars quotes. And my big boy, who's in year 10, he's just turned 15. He's probably been for a couple of years, but he's now officially stronger and bigger than me. So he beats me in most things. But one of the things, you know, he was bragging the other day about how, you know, how big and strong he is. And the quote I gave back to him was the Star Wars quote: "There's always a bigger fish." You know, in the sense that it doesn't matter how big or how important you are, or how big or important you think you are, there's always someone bigger. So my context there is to make sure that I've still got access to some of my key mentors that have been bigger fish and still are, that I can check in with.
That's good.
And the last one is, you know, I want to use the phrase self-mastery, but I don't pretend to have any sense of mastery over myself at the moment. But I think I do. I know myself as a personality style and as a leader really well. And so I've got a few tools that I've used to get there. And one of those, I'm not sure if you heard of the Enneagram before. Have you heard of the Enneagram?
Yeah, I love the Enneagram. Would highly recommend.
Yeah.
People check it out. But yeah, keep going. I love the Enneagram.
So I'm a card carrying type 3. And for those who don't know what a 3 is, a 3 is referred to normally as two different terms. One is the performer and the other one is the achiever. And so I think, you know, I've been quite intentional in using that language with you already, because at my best, I'm an achiever where I strive to achieve. But I've got to be careful when I'm a leader, when I see myself moving into that performance space, because sometimes I need to perform. You know, we've got meetings with, you know, people who we're connected with in terms of building partnerships, and they need to see, for lack of a better term, a performance from the principal. Now, it's not about, you know, getting up and, you know, singing and whatever, but it's about, you know, being the sort of leader that I think they need to see and that I need to represent for our school.
Yeah.
But some of those quotes around being the performer, like if I think about some of those personality traits that I see, I know myself when I'm at my worst. And so I can see those traits. And when I see them, that's a bit of a red flag to me and say, hold on, what are you doing? Do you want to be in this space? If you do, let's go ahead with it. If you don't, just be aware that you might go down this way. So for me, having that, you know, as I mentioned, the teams check-in, the mentor check-in, and being, you know, having some tool to be aware of yourself is absolutely vital.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Any tools around the Enneagram that you found helpful, like any books that you've found or that you'd recommend for people who might have you know, just know a little bit about it, or there could be people who've never heard of it before that they could start with? Anything you know of?
Look, I don't have a lot of written resources as such that I refer to, but probably the most important thing is that I've done 2 lots of Enneagram training at 2 different schools, 2 different organizations. And I've come away from both of those with, you know, some information on your personality type and therefore your leadership type. And, you know, for lack of a better term, who you play well with, who you don't. And if you don't play well, how you can do this and all that sort of stuff. And before the Enneagram, I've never been someone who would, you know, I struggle with those often, you know, those diagnostic tests. But this one for me, I think explains to me really well. It's not, you know, it's not a perfect roadmap, but it does give me a suggestion on the things that I work well with. But more importantly, and this is sort of in response to your question, just some ways that I can work best with other people who may be very different to me.
Yeah.
And I think that was a real challenge in my early leadership when I, you know, worked with a few people who were, I've always got along well with most people, but, you know, in a leadership space, people who have very fixed mindsets about leadership. They're very good people, but may not fully understand themselves as a leader. And when you see that in someone, I think I found that really, I suppose, troubling. I struggled to work with people initially who may not have been able to see themselves in that sense. So I think understanding that as a 3, I can work with different people in this way was a bit of a gift to me. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there, but, you know, I would, you know, I think the first thing is about identifying where you sit in terms of the the 9 types, and then looking at some literature about how you can work with some people and how you don't work with others and how you can overcome that and work with them.
Yeah, that's great. I'd highly recommend people check it out. And there is a lot. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. Have you come across The Road Back to You by Ian Morgan Crone?
I've heard of it, but I haven't done anything with it. Tell me a bit more about it.
So it's good. It's a very I guess with the Enneagram, sometimes you start, if you don't have, if you're not doing a course where there's a really great facilitator like it sounds you had, sometimes you can sort of start pushing into it, and it can just get really confusing really fast, because there's so much depth to it, which is actually, it's big, in my opinion, is one of the biggest advantages of the Enneagram, is how deep it goes. But if you don't know what you're doing, you can quickly sort of go, wait a second, I'm so confused. What's what? And so Ian Morgan Crone has a book called The Road Back to You that sort of has a chapter on each type, and it's just a good like for someone who's just wanting to get an overview and an initial understanding, and it's written in a very accessible. There's a lot of stories in there, so that's one that I've read and really enjoyed, and lots of people I know who love the Enneagram speak highly of that book. So I'm not saying that's the best resource ever on the Enneagram, but that's one that I've found helpful.
And I think your points were made about having a tool or a few tools that enable you to go into depth, because one of the I've seen people engage with the Enneagram in a really, I suppose, in a quick way, in taking an online test that might be 20 questions and then using that as almost a Bible in terms of moving forward of, well, this is who I am and I can't deviate away from that. But probably the best initial thing that I've done was, when I was going to say diagnosed a 3. That sounds horrible. When I was said that I could be a 3, there was both presenters that I've had in working with this, and they've been very skilled, have said, look, we think you might be here, but we also think you might be here. Have a look. So you bring some knowledge and you've got a say in this as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I've appreciated it so much, because, we've all done some of those, diagnostic tests where you go through, you get a whole bunch of numbers, and then you're given this and you feel like, oh, jeepers, this is what I am, I guess. So I just live up to that. But the Enneagram for me has been a bit of a living and a breathing thing, and a way to be able to check myself. The challenge with being a 3, an achiever, is that, as I mentioned before, I'm an introvert. And for an introvert to be an achiever or a performer, sometimes it doesn't work so well. So I've got to be really intentional about how I do that, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's being a 3 and an introvert. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, which is the perfectionist. Yeah. So one of the biggest things that and that wasn't new information, but it certainly was a big aha moment in how it was packaged, and I was going, oh, of course, okay, that's not surprising to people who know me really well, like my wife. But I definitely have found, so just one of the things I've enjoyed about the 1, and for those who want to explore it, there's also, they talk about the wings, and so that for me, there's a wing on the 1 that's the 9 wing, that which is and let me give sort of a simplistic view, my view of this. So I'm not saying that someone who is doing a course on the Enneagram would say it like this, but as a 1 with a 9 wing, one of the biggest things that it helped me with is I'm very driven in terms of when I'm focused on something, and yet at the same time can be incredibly relaxed, and could spend the whole day, when I'm in terms of downtime, literally not moving. And I always found those two things completely at odds with each other, and very much I'd never sort of come across anything that could explain that, except for, so I was always having a poke at why on earth Jonno was like that. And then when I discovered the Enneagram, and I realized that in the 1 person, and through this one sort of understanding the personality type, to realize, Yeah, I am. I do obsess over getting things right, and getting things wrong is very at a deep
Yeah.
level. That's hard, right? But at the same time, I do have this peacemaker, very patient,
Mm.
slow moving, tolerant, which is actually a real superpower as a
Yeah.
consultant, a facilitator, because I can be very patient. And it just gave me some language around that to
Yeah.
be like, okay, like that's normal, and this is how to sort of manage that, but here's the downside, and
Yeah.
here's how it can go wrong, and when I'm in an unhealthy place, here's what it looks like. So for me, just because I love this topic, and for anyone who's going, oh, is this worth checking out, I
Absolutely.
one of the things that, and when I talk about depth in the Enneagram, is that whole idea of healthy versus unhealthy that I love, that you don't
Yes.
get in a lot of other. And so for
Yeah.
me, for me, it's become, with my wife Liz and I, sometimes we even talk about it. When I'm in a really healthy place, there's these 9 numbers in the Enneagram. And when I'm really healthy, it tends to be more like a 7, which is
Yeah.
really fun. So when I'm in a really healthy place, I have a lot of fun. And you'll probably notice that, like with the podcast, I have a lot of fun. I
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
love this. But when stuff's going on and I'm in an unhealthy place for lots of different reasons, like all of us, right? I often, it looks more like, and I feel like a 4, and the 4 is the
Mm.
individualist, which once again is not it's not bad to be a 4, but for me, when I become quite melancholy and quite
Mm.
philosophical, that was once again, because the Enneagram, a great insight, and I catch myself turning into philosophical melancholy Jonno, and and you know what? Once again, we all have those moments. But the funny thing is, it's just a great flag for me to go,
Yeah.
how am I going? And why am I thinking so
Yeah.
philosophically? And it's just, so that's something that I have not discovered in any other type of assessment. That those are just a couple of angles about myself that have been really helpful for me.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I have a few key bits of languages in my mind about the three at the best and the three at the worst, and there's a real fine line between the three at the best and the three at the worst. So for example, at my worst, I'm superficial, inauthentic. At my best, I'm self-propelled, and you can imagine trying to propel yourself and then being superficial. There's a bit of a fine line there, and I can imagine how
Mm,
I can switch between both of those. So as you mentioned, there's a bit of there's a real wariness there, and it's given me some language to say, hold on, if you're in this space or in this column, for lack of a better term, there's something not right here. And what is it? Is it emotions? Is it situations? Is it motivation? What's going on? So I think, as you said, that the Enneagram provides some depth there, and it sounds like we're trying to sell the Enneagram to people. But for me, when I've spoken about educational leadership before, I've just spoken about what sort of the original question you asked about,
mm,
that idea of having authentic feedback. And for me, having a tool that provides you with the ability to give yourself feedback is absolutely vital.
yeah, yeah.
And for me, it has been the Enneagram.
Mm,
As I mentioned, I think and this is my theory. I've shared this with a fellow 3 leader who may not agree with this, but I think the introvert extrovert throws another lens over that. Um, so I worked really closely with a 3 who's an extrovert,
yeah.
and she couldn't understand some of my introvert 3isms, and I kept
Mm,
saying, this is just my lens over it. So whereas you might go this way, I'm going this way.
yes. Yeah.
Um, and you mentioned stories before, and I was wondering if I might have a chance to raise this, but I have a really stupid story, which was a bit of an aha moment for me about when I think I discovered that I was an introverted 3.
Yeah.
So I distinctly remember being 4 years old and holding, it's a really weird story, but there's some context here, holding my mother's and my grandmother's hand, and my sister was with me, and we were at a pretty big shopping centre in South Australia.
Yeah.
And we were watching, and this is going to give away my age, we were, a child of the 80s, we were watching these rap artists, and they were like doing breakdancing. And I thought, man, this is the coolest thing ever. These guys are performing. This is awesome. And I remember I was holding some paperwork that I must have got from somewhere, like it was the pamphlets about a toy shop or something. And for some reason, these guys, while they were mid dance, walked over and grabbed me and pulled me out in the middle of this crowd. And they were hoping that I would dance them as a young person.
Yeah.
Right now, I remember looking, and I just remember looking around and suddenly looking up, and just seeing all, those, you see those Hollywood movies where someone looks up and they see like the room swirling around them. I remember seeing that with these faces, and then I looked down and saw this paper that I was holding just everywhere, and I thought, my goodness, this is a mess. And like, I'm expected to perform here, and I can't do it. And I just remember just running, like I just bolted. And so for me, it was that reminder. And I remember when I did my first Enneagram training, it was an aha moment. I went, oh my goodness, this was maybe like the first time when I had this, not fear, but I recognized that public performance was actually pretty scary.
Yeah.
And I know it's a strange story, but maybe there's a connection there. I don't know.
No, that's a great story. I love, and I always love stories like that because you have no idea what's going on at the time. And usually we have no idea what's going on for 30 years after that, really.
Yeah.
But then one day you look back and you go, oh my goodness, yeah, there's a pattern there. There's something there. There's a seed there so no, thank you for sharing that. That was great.
Yeah.
Now I'm just aware of the time.
Yeah.
Are you on a hard deadline? Do we need to wrap up right now, or can we go a little bit over?
I've got a little bit of time. That's fine.
Okay. Sorry to ask you that in the middle of the podcast, but
that's all good.
I wanted to just do a couple of quick Leadership Express questions with you. You ready?
Sure. Yep.
Okay. Firstly, Corey, what is a book that you've gifted to other people?
Oh, as I mentioned, the lens for my leadership is education. So most of my reading when I have time is around education, and I'll share two books, one author. There's an educational leader from Canada called Michael Fullan.
Yep.
And he's written a book called Nuance and a book called New Pedagogies for Deeper Learning. And they're important because I suppose they connect with two elements of my leadership. Nuance is about understanding that intentional impact you can have as a leader. And that word nuance is perfect. That you might do something one way and it changes something slightly, but the impact could be huge. The second one around, the second one around new pedagogies for deeper learning is understanding that there's different ways to plan and measure for student and society success beyond a diagnostic test or, those sort of narrow learning experiences, which are important because they tell us stuff, but let's find other stories to tell us what to complement that.
Yeah, they're great recommendations. Okay, what is a great piece of advice you've received?
I have a bit of a metaphor which came from one of my leaders, has developed over time, and it's called the Corey train. And the advice is that just occasionally stop being the conductor and have a look, and just to make sure people are on the train, because it doesn't matter what your great ideas are, how big of an impact you reckon this can make. If people aren't on board the journey with you, there's actually no point in doing it. So for me, it's just, it's that phrase of the Corey train, and that's just enough to keep me going.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. What about a movie or TV show that really impacted you? We've already heard about Star Wars. So you can use that one again.
No, I'm laughing because I have really bizarre and broad tastes in film and television.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it.
Some of them, like, you go into depth, and I was, as a previous English teacher, you've looked at some real deep, impactful movies, and films and, TV shows. But as I think I get older, I probably watch movies almost purely for joy and just look for sometimes a bit of brain dead stuff, but also a bit of things to be challenged. And oddly enough, it's a really strange answer, but one of the movies that impacted me heavily was my favorite movie of all time, which is Pulp Fiction.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And it did because at the time I was almost finished school, and I was, thinking about writing and English teaching, and I was, in love with the idea of narrative and character and all that sort of stuff. And suddenly this movie came along that actually was out of narrative. You think, what on earth is going on here? So while, the name Pulp Fiction is, the idea that it's actually it's meaningless. And sometimes we can obsess over the meaningless nature of things. So I thought, my goodness, if I just spent 2.5 hours thinking, what the hell what did I watch this for? But what I loved about it is that it's countercultural. It's different. You can think of things differently, and you can go back to it and see something that wasn't in the first set viewing, and you can see it differently. So maybe that it promoted divergent thinking and deep charactership, I suppose.
Yeah, 100%. That's why I love asking that question, because leaders, there's all the leadership stuff we've talked about, but there's something about art,
Yeah.
now you mentioned sci-fi. This isn't one of the Leadership Express questions, but I just have to ask this. Do you read any sci-fi or fantasy?
No, I used to when I was at school. It was one of those, I was comics and narratives and novels, used to really get into it. But I think as I said, that in terms of being time poor and
Yes.
using it as a bit of a disconnect from what's going on in academic world and a connection with a different world. I love, I love a whole bunch of stuff, but sci-fi connects with me partly also with leadership, because I know it's not real, but I love seeing the positions that leaders are in and the decisions that they make.
100%.
Often I always think they've got that caveat of saying something scientific that makes no sense and everyone goes, yes, let's go with that. So that's, I always think I've been cheated out of, you've had this 45 minutes to come up with this solution, and then you've talked about, what about if we reverse the polarity in the quantum, blah blah blah. And I thought, well, that's just bullshit. Excuse my language. But
or enhance. Can you enhance that? Enhance that image times 10. Yes, we've worked it out. It's like, that's funny. I mentioned that because for me, I'd never really watched or read much sci-fi or fantasy, but I found a couple of years, probably about 4 years ago, as part of sort of self-care and as a hobby, I started reading. I used to get frustrated. I'd read fiction, but it would be over after one book, and it was I'd get so into it. And so I started reading these long series by Raymond Feist, and I'm reading one at the moment by Brandon Sanderson. And but the one, Raymond Feist, I think, was 24 books, and I read them over. And so I just found, for me, just the escape to actually be in this other world for a little bit every day was so rich. And I enjoyed it so much. So yes, Raymond Feist. What's the other guy's name? Robert Jordan, I think his name is. The Wheel of Time. They've just turned it into a series on Amazon Prime, actually. The Wheel of Time. But that's another great series. So anyone looking for a hobby that reading those books, and when I say read, I mean, to be honest, I do audiobooks because I love going to bed and my brain's still ticking with clarity, right? I have too many ideas. And so something about just switching on an audiobook like that, going into this random world for 15 minutes is so enjoyable. There we go. Not your traditional leadership conversation, but that's the whole point of the podcast. Okay, one more question for you, Corey. If you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say?
Oh, wow. I reckon it's a tough one. And I'm going to cheat. And I was going to use a Star Trek quote. I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan, but there's something called the Kobayashi Maru. I don't know if is that familiar to you?
No, not yet. So I do plan to watch it at some point.
So it's a Captain Kirk response, and there was a Kobayashi Maru. It was a simulation that was set up in the Starfleet. I can't believe I'm talking about this, in the Starfleet Leadership Academy, and it was a test that was set up to fail. Everyone who tried it failed, and that was the lesson, that you can't do everything right. But Captain Kirk, his response to it was he changed the rules and he passed it. So what I'm going to do is a Kobayashi Maru and change the rules slightly. I'm going to give you two quotes. They come from two different perspectives. One is back yourself as a young leader. Absolutely back yourself. But the other side of that is learn from others. And I reckon leadership is somewhere in the middle of that. And often, sort of I talk about Venn diagram of leadership. Sometimes it's about going one way, sometimes it's about going the other way, but ultimately it's about taking the wisdom from yourself and others and making the best decision and moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. That's not just great leadership advice. I think that's life is in the balance between those two things. I think a lot of the time that confidence to back yourself mixed with that humility and teachability to really deeply learn from others and be open. That's a wonderful thought to finish. So if people do want to connect with you online or find your school and check out what you're doing, maybe something you've mentioned today has been really helpful. Are there any ways in terms of LinkedIn, that sort of thing, where people can contact you online?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn as Corey Tavella. I think I'm probably one of the only Tavellas in Australia on LinkedIn, so I'm pretty easy to find. I am on Twitter as well. You can find me, but I'm not very active on that anymore. It's probably Twitter's more of an educator's paradise. And I think as I moved more into leadership, it's really hard not to think like an educator, because I still am in every sense of the word. But I really enjoy engaging with people on LinkedIn and seeing what different leadership is in and outside of education. So I'm certainly found there. And our website is really easy to find. It's tmc.catholic.edu.au. Yeah, we're really proud of our school. It's an awesome place to be.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. Today's been a lot of fun. I know it will have also been really helpful. And there'll be some people who I always believe, just really needed to hear something that we sort of said in passing today at some point from Corey, and that's why I love doing this. So thank you for tuning in to our listeners. Don't forget, I also have the Jonno White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast, which are both across all platforms for people to check out. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to Corey for being so much fun to chat with, and but also just bringing such wisdom. And that was just, it wasn't just fun. I felt like it was a really good, sort of robust conversation about things like presence that, for me, I look back probably at Jonno leading 10 years ago, and I think that's something I didn't really get. And I'm so excited that leaders who might be at that stage or older, might hear that and actually implement that. And it's a game changer. So yeah, I had so much fun today, but really appreciate your generosity and your time. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Corey.
No, thanks, Jonno. My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jonno White, or clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jonno White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.